Thanks everybody for joining today. I'm excited to talk to you guys a little bit today about visualizing and controlling your hybrid network. Obviously, hybrid is a hot topic these days, right? It means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and it comes with a lot of inherent challenges, right? There's certainly value that you get from making a hybrid network and optimizing your network in the way that makes sense for your use cases and your enterprise. But there's some challenges that we need to overcome to really get that value out of your hybrid network. So I think this is a great topic. I'm excited to be here to talk about it today. So I want to kind of start with some level setting, right? And some of this may seem kind of obvious, but it's a good level set, and it really feeds into some of the deeper discussions that we're going to have here. So when we talk about a hybrid network here at Tufin, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about everything from so your traditional on-premise networks, your data centers, your enterprise network with your physical or virtual firewalls connecting all of your different branch offices. We're talking about private cloud, and usually when we talk about private cloud, we're talking about SDN, software defined networks. Public cloud, obviously, right? We're talking about moving things into the public cloud and the connectivity that needs to exist into the public cloud. And then microservices, right? More and more enterprises are moving towards a microservice approach, Kubernetes, that sort of thing. And they may be running that on-prem, maybe running it in the public cloud, maybe running it in your private cloud, or a hybrid approach of the hybrid approach, right? So all of these things, depending on your deployment, may combine to make up your hybrid network. So obviously here at Tufin, if you're not familiar with Tufin, we tend to be in the very sort of largest, most complex networks, right? So think of the very largest sort of global enterprises. That tends to be our sweet spot because we really bring all these different technologies together and allow enterprises to get the best use out of them, the most efficient, and to manage compliance across those very, very complex networks. So we have some pretty unique insights into what some of these very, very large enterprises are seeing and how they're approaching their hybrid networks. So I want to talk for a minute again, just level setting. What do we hear from our customers when we talk about hybrid networks? And the first thing we'll talk about is what's driving the move to hybrid, right? We're not just doing it for the sake of doing it because it's the next cool thing. We're really trying to achieve some value, some improvement out of this move to hybrid. And again, these may be things that seem very obvious, but when we talk later about some of the challenges that we get from a hybrid network, and we talk about trying to solve those problems, we need to keep these drivers in mind, right? Because if our challenges are negating the value that we're trying to get, they're really not solutions. So increasingly distributed workforce, right? This was happening before COVID. Everybody kind of points to COVID as the real spike in it. It was certainly happening before, but it's happening now at really unprecedented levels, and that is certainly driving a move to hybrid. Cost reduction is another one, right? Moving to the cloud isn't always cheaper, but when you talk about things like being able to scale on demand, things like that, you can achieve real cost reduction depending on your use cases by moving to cloud or moving to hybrid. The increase in speed and agility is another obvious one, right? We're moving to DevSecOps style methods of development. We're moving to infrastructure as code, right? And that's all to increase the speed of our business, increase the speed at which we're able to innovate, and increase the way how agile we can be. And the hybrid cloud is really sort of uniquely positioned to be able to deliver that. Need to scale on demand. Kind of talked about that already, but the ability to scale up and scale down, right? A lot of times our workloads are are up and down for various reasons, right? We need to be able to scale up very quickly when we need that, and then be able to scale back down, right? It goes to that cost reduction. And finally, business transformation initiatives, right? There's a wide variety of reasons why you might be looking to transform the way you're doing business. Could be for compliance purposes. It could be for speed and agility, right? But the hybrid cloud, when done correctly, can really help support some of those business transformation initiatives. Things like zero trust, things like that. Um, can really benefit from a hybrid approach to our enterprise network. So, with that in mind, what are some of the challenges that you face when you're trying to move to a hybrid cloud? Well, first of all, it's very fundamental differences in technologies and how they're implemented. You know, 20 years ago when we were looking at just on-premise firewalls and even next gen firewalls, we became very comfortable with those technologies, how they worked, how they were deployed, and how we secure those effectively. And when we talk about things like SDN, when we talk about multi-cloud and even microservices, the way they function and the way we secure them is very fundamentally different, and that can pose a challenge, right? We especially when you talk about moves to cloud and things like that, that may be more public facing and more exposed. You have an incredibly increased potential attack surface, and if we don't understand how to properly secure that, it opens the enterprise up to really increased risk. The solutions, the security solutions that we're deploying on top of those are also very fundamentally different, right? So things like cloud have the public cloud vendors have their own sort of cloud native security solutions that is part of what we manage here at Tufin. But there are third party solutions that are specifically designed to work on top of the public cloud or SDN or Kubernetes. And those, again, very fundamentally different, and there's a skills gap, right? This is not something that people have dealt with for the last 20 years. This is something we're kind of learning as we're going, and that's another challenge that we have. Connecting and securing networks is another challenge, right? We're no longer sort of dealing with this perimeter, right? The perimeter is kind of just gone, and we have to worry about connecting all of these different networks that make up our hybrid network, but securing them, right? Ensuring that we have the connection, we have the connection necessary to function as a business, but also that connection is secure. We have a huge increase in the number of security solutions as we move to a hybrid cloud, right? As I mentioned, there are specific tools that are just meant for securing public cloud. There are specific tools for Kubernetes and networking on top of Kubernetes to secure Kubernetes networks. And again, in the SDN space, and what that's caused is really an explosion in the number of security solutions that you have to deal with, and that causes a number of problems. Your visibility becomes very siloed, right? You have a specific security solution that maybe you're using to manage your compliance and security inside of cloud, but that doesn't see the big picture of what's going on a premise or what's going on inside of Kubernetes. So you decrease your visibility, you become much more siloed. And that makes it very difficult to understand the overall impact of security policies and really effectively assess the security posture of your network. It makes it much more complex to manage. You have different teams that are involved in that, and troubleshooting becomes exponentially more difficult because, again, you're very siloed. You don't have that sort of full picture. And how do you assess compliance across there? Sure, your cloud network may be compliant based on scanning or the security solution you have in the cloud. Your on-premise network may be compliant, but what about that connectivity in between, right? How do you accurately assess that and determine that, am I assessing the proper regulations, and can I even have visibility into that? I mentioned the silos and the different teams involved in management. Um, that just that when you increase the number of people involved and the number of teams involved, processes get more complex. It takes longer to get things done, and so the result is that a lot of the agility that we hope to get out of the hybrid network really gets sucked up into these silos, into these complex processes, and you get finger pointing back and forth, and you run into governance issues, right? Who controls what? And you have this expectation of increased speed and agility, and that can pose a challenge, right? Management expects, hey, we're going to go to hybrid cloud, we're moving to cloud, and our speed and agility is just going to go through the roof, right? And that puts tremendous pressure on the security and the applications teams to try to deliver that increase in speed and agility without sacrificing security. And in practice, that's very difficult to do. So what are some of the questions that we hear from our customers, right? What are they coming to us to solve, or what are they looking for a solution for? Most common question we get is what's going on my hybrid network, right? We talked about how things are very siloed, and our customers really have challenges figuring out, hey, what's the big picture here, right? So what does my hybrid network look like? I understand what's going on in my cloud, I understand what's going on in Kubernetes, but how do I put that all together and really understand what's going on? What are the end-to-end effect of my policies, right? I'm allowing something on this firewall, but does that translate to the cloud? Or, I have this cloud security group that is allowing traffic, but I also have this virtual firewall in my cloud. Why is one working and not the other? Or, how do I combine those? And how do I optimize my hybrid network, right? And again, that's really going back to that sort of visibility of, I need to understand what's going on so I can figure out maybe what's suboptimal. How can I reconfigure this? How can I take out latency? Things like that to make my network as optimized as I can. Next common theme we get is how do I deal with risk and compliance? So, am I currently compliant, right? And can I demonstrate that I'm currently compliant? If I'm subject to annual or some other type of audits, how can I demonstrate to an auditor, to stakeholders, to shareholders that I am currently compliant, not just on premise, not just in the cloud, but across my entire estate? And how can I ensure compliance moving forward, right? You can spend 2 months before an audit to find all of your violations and get ready. And on day zero of the audit, you are compliant. But how can I ensure compliance moving forward so that 10 months from now I'm not in that 2-month scramble to try to get compliant again? And how can I make compliance less of a burden, right? Again, going back to what we're hoping to achieve, why are people moving to the hybrid cloud? It's about speed, it's about agility, and oftentimes you kind of see speed and agility and security and compliance as like polar opposites, right? And our customers are coming to us saying, how can we make this less of a burden? How can we solve this problem? And how can I move faster, right? I want that speed and agility of my hybrid network. How can I move faster? How can I take these processes, especially around change management, where I have to ensure compliance has to be baked in? How can I streamline that process and get that speed and agility without sacrificing security? And how can I facilitate better cross-functional collaboration? How can I break down those silos, right? We talked about those silos introduce friction, and that reduces speed. So if I can increase my cross-functional collaboration, I can get better speed, I can get better agility, I can make better decisions, and it's much easier to maintain compliance. So with all that in mind, we've got all that level setting. We've heard what our customers are telling us. What do we need to do? How can we effectively manage our hybrid networks and get the most value out of them? Well, we need to increase our visibility, right? And that needs to be unified visibility across the entire hybrid network. It needs to be across teams, reduce those silos. It needs to be across technologies. So we're not just getting a tiny bit of the picture, we're seeing the whole picture in a unified view, understanding the impact of one policy over here across the entire communication stream across our cloud and across our policies. And we need to do it without the need for many, many tools, because that just creates that builds more silos, that creates more sort of the swivel chair work, and it induces more errors, right? You increase your chance for errors switching between tools, copying and pasting, things like that. We need to ensure compliance on our hybrid network, and we need to do it automatically, right? If we want to have that speed and agility, compliance can't be a completely manual process. And we need to do it now, and we need to do it in the future, meaning we need to be compliant and we need to ensure that we can maintain continuous compliance, not just, sort of point in time compliance. And again, we need to do it across the entire hybrid network. So we're not just looking at bits and pieces and assessing our compliance in sort of these little microcosms. And we need to do it without sacrificing scale and without sacrificing agility, meaning that we can't slow the process down. We can't let security become an inhibitor to what we're trying to achieve out of our hybrid networks. And we need to maintain agility. We need to find that balance of security and agility, and allow both of those, really allow security to become an enabler of agility, right? Make those security processes so good that that they're actually speeding things up, not slowing things down. And we can do that through intelligent automation, right? Automation is a term that gets thrown around a lot. And so, it's going to automate everything, right? Well, automation is only as good as the inputs. And so we need to really look at how we're doing automation to ensure that we're doing it in a way that is effective, and it's not increasing risk, it's not increasing error rates, things like that, and do it without sacrificing compliance, right? So we can't just throw automation around willy-nilly. We need to make sure that that we're doing so with an eye on compliance. And with that, we've suffered through enough slides. I want to actually hop into the product and actually show you some of the stuff we're doing, and how we're actually addressing those challenges that we talk about, right? I wasn't just talking to hear myself talk. We can actually help you solve some of these problems. So as we walk through this demo, obviously, I mean, we could spend hours just going through the product, but I want to kind of keep in mind that sort of where we ended up, right? What do we need to do to get the most out of our hybrid network? Increase visibility, ensure compliance, maintain agility, and so we'll show you kind of how we do that. So what we're looking at here is the Secure Track dashboard, right? I mentioned that Secure Track is kind of the base of the suite. It's what provides that visibility and compliance. So it's a logical place to start here. And this, when you log in, you get a very quick overview of what's going on in your hybrid network, right? This is everything. See, there's not a spot here for, on-premise, not a spot here for SDN cloud, right? This is everything. So how many rules do I have? How many devices am I managing, right? You get a very, very quick overview of what's going on your network. You'll see things like rules for cleanup, highly permissive rules. Those are things we'll talk about later. We've got some more detailed information here about cleanup and optimization, violations. These are all things that I'll show you kind of in more detail. And then what's recently changed on my network, right? And again, doesn't matter where that change was made. We're seeing it all right here. So we talked about, visibility and understanding the policies inside of my network. And when you want to get really, really deep down into your hybrid network policies, you do that through our rule viewer. So this here is every rule in your policy base that you can browse through. And you can see, I mean, there's over 1,800 of them. So it's going to take a while to scroll through all of them. But you can see here, the vendors, right? So we see some AWS here. Um, but more often, what you're going to be doing in here is searching, right? So we have the ability to perform very granular searches across your entire policy base. So if we just say source IP, P is 5, right? So we can start to perform searches over our entire policy base. And if you see here, I'm just searching for source IP address, right? And keep in mind that you can get much more complex in your queries, and some of the dashboard widgets, as we'll see, will actually bring you back to queries. It's a great way to kind of help you get started with the rule viewer. Question in the chat: can the tool handle more than 10,000 rule? Or yes, 10,000 rules. Yes, absolutely. We have customers with many more than 10,000, or excuse me, 100,000 rules. So yes, scales very, very well. You can get much more advanced here. So we can say and then we can, just, if we wanted to search for a destination IP, right? And you can do ands and ors and nots and contains and parentheses. So you can get very complex, but we're just going to look here at just this example of source IP. And you can see here, now we start to see some different vendors show up here. So we've got some policies in AWS that match this source. We've got some policies from Cisco Firepower, Nexus, FortiManager up in Azure. We've got some Azure policies, Panorama. Here's some NSX. We've got Zscaler policies, right? So, when we talk about, the need to reduce the number of tools, right? Going back to that first question we had there, and, why do you want that sort of single unified interface, right? If I had all of these different firewalls and as a demo environment, right? So maybe you wouldn't have, Firepower, Nexus, and Fortinet. Maybe you'd only have, 3 firewall vendors instead of, 4 or 5, right? But still, you've got to log into each one of those and do this search and say, okay, what's my source IP? And then you've got to probably manually take that data out, put it into a spreadsheet, right? Well, here I can see it all in one place, right? Very easily understand what's providing access across my entire hybrid network. What devices are providing access from this source. I can look very quickly at the number of devices over here, right? So this is just a quick device list. So if I wanted to focus maybe on only my my cloud policies, right? I can do that very quickly. And the other thing I can do from here is double click on any one of these here. So let's just take this I don't know, Firepower as an example here, right? I can click on any one of these and see the policy details in a very normalized way, right? So if we see here, this is the Firepower rule that I just looked at here. Let's scroll down and let's find something that's not a traditional firewall. How about SX? So here's our NSX policy, right? Very, very different, fundamentally different technology, but we're bringing this together in a very unified experience so that you can understand things like source, destination, service. You can see other things that we're calculating, when it was last modified, how permissive is this? So this is something that we score based off of the source, destination, and service. And when we talked about that second phase in the sort of the life cycle that our customers go through, right, the cleanup phase, this is something that you're going to want to look at, right? Start looking for all of my permissive rules and potentially reducing the attack surface. If maybe I don't need this any here, maybe I could limit this to just HTTPS SSH, right? Lower that permissiveness. Whether the rule is shadowed, whether there's any policy violations, right? Very, very, very granular details, very granular view of your policies, again, regardless of where they are on the hybrid network. I think one of the coolest things to demo anyway, and probably the top 5 coolest features altogether in the product, is our topology map, right? We talked about getting that visibility and trying to understand, just what's going on in my hybrid network, right? How does it all work? We zoom in here. This is a topology map of your network, regardless of whether it's a on-premise device, right? We can see some FortiGate stuff here. We have some connections over here to Azure over an IPsec tunnel. Some more Azure stuff going back to FortiGates, right? The MPLS tunnels here, Juniper devices. Here's some of the NSXV stuff that we looked at. There's some more Azure down here. Some Palo stuff going into an AWS data center, right? So again, breaking down those silos of technology, those silos of visibility, and showing you all in one place what your actual network topology looks like. How is your hybrid network connected across vendors, across even product categories, right? And we can do that because we have very deep visibility into the configuration of all of these devices. So your routes, your interfaces, your security policies, your groups, things like that. And because we have that very, very deep visibility, we can even take it one step further, and we can do path analysis. So let me just pull up a query here that should have, let's try, I think this one will work. Should have some good results here. So what we're doing is we're querying this topology map from a source to a destination over a particular service, right? So in this case, it's a /32 to a subnet over HTTPS, right? These can be subnets, these can be security groups, they can be users, host names. If you're into ACI, you can have EPGs here. But however you choose to specify your source and destination in your service, then we can hit find path, and we're going to search this topology map and actually see two things. One, is there a route from the source to the destination? And we see in this case, there is. If there was not, we get an error message popping up saying that a path didn't exist. But perhaps more importantly, we can see some of these icons are different, right? So here's our source as we progress along, but you see these icons here are different. What that indicates is whether or not that traffic was permitted or denied by policy, right? So we see here this little red stop here. So if I right click on this Palo Alto device and say, show me the matching rules, we can see that this policy, or this imaginary traffic, would be blocked by the implicit deny rule, right? And that's probably the same on a majority of these. So, understanding the connectivity, and again, I talked about sort of that lack of visibility, sort of in the gaps between vendor A and vendor B, and understanding, yeah, okay, my policy here allows this or blocks this, but how does that impact the rest of my network? Well, right here, I can see that in a very, very easy to understand graph, right? Where's my traffic going? This is on-premise stuff here, on-premise stuff, and then all the way out into my cloud, into Azure, right? And I can even see my Azure policies here. So it makes it very easy to understand, and just the troubleshooting capabilities of this is huge, right? Geez, I think I should be able to get there, and I can't. I don't understand, or maybe I don't have visibility into it, right? It's a different team that controls our cloud, and I'm on the networking team, the firewall team, right? That is finger pointing back and forth. They're saying it's me, I'm saying it's them. Just go in here really quick, do a topology query, and say, oh, here's the device that's blocking that. Okay, so that's a little bit about visibility, and I need to speed it up a little bit because I have a few more things I wanted to get into. So, so compliance, right? We covered some of what we can do in visibility. How can we help ensure compliance in a hybrid network without making those sacrifices that we talked about, right? Still achieving those goals here. One of the main things that I talked about when we looked at that sort of overview of our products was the unified security policy. And I want to show you exactly what that looks like, because that's really at the heart of what we do around compliance. You can think of the unified security policy as a set of guardrails that we're going to apply to our policy, right? So the USP, Unified Security Policy, by itself does not enforce policy. It does not create policies on your devices. What you do with the Unified Security Policy is set a desired state. You set those guardrails and you say, moving forward from now on, this is the confines that I want all future security policies to conform to, right? And we'll assess existing security policies against them as well. So you can see it's built in kind of this matrix style. Now, each of these on the top and along the side here are a series of zones. Now, these zones can be made up of different IPs, subnets, security groups, things like that, right? So we support, different mechanisms for mapping assets back to zones. And another one of those integrations that we looked at on that integration wheel was IPAM, right? So you don't have to build these zones out manually. If you have an IPAM solution already in place that is sort of working as your source of truth for your IP addressing in your enterprise, great, we can sync with that. We can build these zones out automatically, define them automatically, and every time you change it in the IPAM, it will be reflected in Tufin. So we can make sure that we're applying these guardrails correctly, even as your dynamic addressing scheme changes over time. And so, regardless of how you're defining these zones, what we're doing here is we're saying what should or should not be allowed in these zones, right? So you can see here, interzone traffic in this case is allowed. Green check mark means we're allowing all traffic. Between these two zones, it's blocked. More commonly, what you're going to set up is something like this, where you can see this sort of customized icon. And you get, if we hover over it, you get kind of a snapshot of it. But if we actually click on it here, we can see how we can define this. So we're saying we're either going to allow or block, right? Kind of a, either a blacklist or a whitelist style approach to this particular portion of the USB. And then what do we want to allow? So in this case, we're saying from this zone to this zone, only allow these particular services, right? And you can specify port and protocol here as well. You can also add much more qualitative requirements, right? So any policy has to have an explicit source or destination. It has to be logged, right? Things like that. And then the severity. So if a policy violates this particular aspect of the unified security policy, how severe is that, right? And you might define that differently based off of, the criticality of the network segment, right? If it's, so you're subject to PCI, for example, and this zone is a PCI zone, you might say this violation is very critical. If it is on your printer network, you might say, well, it's a medium severity, right? And you can handle those, escalate those alerts appropriately, right? So this is how we define that unified security policy, those security policy guardrails that we're going to apply to all of the policies across our hybrid network, regardless of what vendor or where it lives in the hybrid network. And you can see here, we can have multiple unified security policies. So in this case, we have 17, which is probably more than you might have in a typical enterprise because this is a demo environment. But you can see here, we have one for just corporate security, right? And this may cover your entire enterprise. You may also have certain segments that are subject to NERC CIP, or PCI, right? We have an example for NIST 853. So you can overlay these unified security policies on different portions of your network, or even on the same portion of the network to cover different aspects of your security program, right? But again, the important thing is that it doesn't matter at the end of the day to Tufin whether that violation exists in a firewall up in the cloud, or in an SDN running on-prem or in the cloud, or traditional firewall. We're going to apply those guardrails very uniformly. So if we go back to our rule viewer here, actually, let's go back to the dashboard here. So talking about compliance here, if we look at down here, USP compliance, we can see all of the rules with our violations, right? And we can see them here by severity, by device. And I see a lot of these are kind of firewall type things, but So here's, for example, NSX here, right? So we can see again the violations across our entire hybrid network broken down here, and any one of these we can drill into. So you can see here again we're pivoting back to that rule viewer, right? So we're looking at what we saw in that graph now displayed as a query in the rule viewer here, and we can see all of the policies with a high severity violation. We can click on any one of these and we can either click here to go to violations, or we can go to the violations tab here, and it's going to show us exactly what those policy violations are, right? So again, when we were in that cleanup phase of the sort of the approach to zero touch automation, this is some of the stuff that our customers are doing. And as networks become hybrid, they tend to kind of grow and outpace themselves, and you tend to find a lot of suboptimal configurations, a lot of potential policy or compliance violations in those environments. This is a great way to start understanding what those are and to start identifying them and cleaning them up, so we can see what the USP was, what zones it was going to and from, what services are in violation, and what the security requirement is. So I should be blocking all according to this USP, but we have several services being allowed, right? And you can then create tickets inside of secure change to remediate those, right? Or maybe you need to go back to the application owner first. Maybe you need to create an exception in the USP. You can do that as well. If there's a business justification for this one policy, right? You can certainly do that. So if we go back to the dashboard, just some other compliance and cleanup things here real quick. You can see rules for cleanup and rules for optimization. So again, this is sort of that second phase, right? But it ties into compliance, because these cleanup and optimization things are not necessarily overt risk, but they induce complexity that builds up, especially in a hybrid network, and that complexity over time introduces risk. So these are other things that you can clean up, things like rules that are fully shadowed, meaning there's a you have a /16 rule and then a /24 rule, right? That /24 rule is shadowed. It's never going to get hit because of that /16 rule, right? And that introduces complexity, but it also introduces potential for risk, because what if you want to get rid of that access and you delete that /16 rule thinking that, well, now I've removed that access, right? Well, you've got this 24 into here that has never been hit before because it was shadowed, but now is providing access, even though you thought you removed that access, right? So it goes towards risk and compliance. And the very last thing I want to touch on here is automation, and how we start to automate across the hybrid network, and really again balance that security and agility. So I'm going to log into our secure change product and just give you a quick overview of some of the stuff that we can do here. So within secure change, we have a set of workflows, right? And these workflows are really what allows you to define what your change processes are, right? So it's not a here's our solution, use it. It's a here's our solution, make it your own, right? Build your existing workflows, codify those into our product. So if we just look at something very basic like a firewall change request workflow, you can see it's made up of a series of steps, right? And again, this is, it's there's not a step here that says, make changes in the cloud, make changes in, your SDN, right? This is taking place across the entire hybrid network, right? You don't have separate workflows or separate steps for each sort of device you're interacting with. So you can see this is just an example workflow where we're doing things like identifying the targets of the change, identifying risk, reviewing the risk, doing the design and approval, committing the change, and then verifying the change. And just take note here of a couple little icons up here. These little A's right here on step 2 and step 7 mean that this step is automated. So there is no human or analyst action required to complete these steps. And this can be completely customized. You can introduce more automation. We do have some example workflows that are completely automated. Or you can add extra steps here. If maybe you need to have 2 design or 2 approval steps here, right, assigned to different business units, you can do that. The fully automated workflow that I talked about before, where there's, it's completely automated from start to finish, is true, except for one of these steps right here. This is a conditional step, right? So we're doing risk review and approval. Well, if we've identified no risks here, we don't need to do risk review and approval, right? So we can skip this. So that's what this step here is doing. So you can create a completely automated workflow that goes through, does the design, implementation, verification, and will only pause if there's risks identified. How do we identify risk? Back to the USP, right? So we're looking at for change that is submitted, is this change going to create new risk, new USP violations in my environment? If not, then maybe you're okay with just making that change. If it does, then that needs to have a closer review, right? It either needs to be approved by a manager or maybe sent back to the requester, right? We can also ingest third-party sources of risk. So we have things like our VCA that brings in vulnerability data, things like that. But that's what the risk review and approval is doing. And that's how we bring that USP back in. And we're actually trying to proactively identify risk, right? Being able to find all that stuff in our existing rule base was great. And that is, that's great for the compliance now. We talked about that, how do I ensure that continuous compliance? That's how you do it. You bring the USP into your automation and catch those potential risks before they're introduced into the network. So let's just look real quickly, because we're almost at time here, just at an example and kind of how some of this stuff works here. So you can see this is an access request. Now, if we go back to step one, this is all that was supplied, right? Source, destination, service. So I want to get from these sources to these destinations over SSH, right? Now, if we go to that second step, that risk review and approve, or excuse me, target and risk, you see one of the very first things we've done is identified the targets for these changes. So to impact, to affect this change right here that's been requested, these are all the places we need to make changes. Now, in this case, it looks like mostly firewall stuff, but this panorama could be running in the cloud. You could have something in your SDN environment here, right? So we're identifying those targets. We're using that same sort of topology search results to identify the targets of the change, right? And again, that's that end-to-end visibility, that end-to-end change management across the entire hybrid network. So we've identified the targets. We figured out where we're going to need to make changes. And you can see we've done a risk assessment, and the button's red. Red is bad. So we can go in here and we can see what risk would be introduced if I made this change. Going back to the USP violations here. So we can see what the security requirement is and what the violations are, right? You can see this creates a number of different violations across a number of different USPs. So it's great for demo, not great for production environments. But we can see, hey, what would we be introducing for risk if we progress this ticket forward? Now, that doesn't mean that you can have a business process that allows that, but generally we're thinking it's bad, right? And the very last thing I'll show you here is the change designer, right? So we're assuming we've accepted this risk, we're good with it, we're going to roll with it. Now we can run the change designer, and what that's going to do is look at the request, look at the targets, where do we need to make those changes, and figure out actually what changes need to be made. And the green designer icon's already lit up. It means it's already been run. So here's our designer recommendations. So we're going to say, hey, for Cisco, here's 1, 2, 3, 4 devices. Here's the changes that need to be made on each device to impact that change, right? So we're adding new network groups, we're adding new rules. Down here, it's relevant interfaces allow all traffic. So you don't need to make any changes at all, right? Fortinet, you'll get something very similar here. So we can see all of these new objects that are going to be suggested. And then for Palo Alto here on our panorama. And again, any of these could be, running in the cloud, in the public cloud. We support this for things like NSX and ACI. So these changes could be a combination of really anywhere inside of your hybrid network. And finally, we have the ability to actually provision these out. So once we've accepted this risk, we've decided that that change is what we want it to be, we can provision that change out. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who attended. I hope this was useful. I really, the hybrid network I think is a really powerful tool, but we really have to think carefully about how we manage it and how we do compliance and visibility when we start really getting the complex hybrid network. So this is something that's really of interest to me. I hope it provided some value to you guys. That's it. That's all I have. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate everybody's time.